This is Art Sense, a podcast focused on educating and informing listeners about the past, present, and future of art. I'm Craig Gould. On today's episode, I speak with Silvia Karman Cubiñá, Executive Director and Chief Curator of the Bass Museum of Art in Miami Beach. As Miami Beach's contemporary art museum, the Bass organizes exhibits for its historical Art Deco building by collaborating with leading artists from around the world on commissioned additions to its collection. As the Bass approaches its 60th anniversary, Silvia takes time to outline what makes the Bass unique, the opportunities the museum has to engage with its community, and plans for a new structure. And now, a conversation about stewarding an institution for shared belonging with Silvia Karman Cubiñá. Silvia Karman Cubiñá, thank you so much for joining me this week on the Art Sense podcast. Silvia, you are the Executive Director and Chief Curator of the Bass Museum in Miami Beach, Florida. I wanted to have you on the occasion of the Bass's 60th anniversary to talk about your unique institution, the history, what the museum has become, and kind of the topics that kind of swirl around someone who's heading up a museum like yours. Silvia, I guess the first question is, for those of us who aren't familiar with the Bass, who haven't visited Miami Beach, how would you start to describe your institution to us?
Thank you, Craig. The Bass is Miami Beach's Contemporary Art Museum, and that's who we are. We're 60 years old in 2024, and the Bass is the first civic museum founded in Miami-Dade County. So it's quite a responsibility to be running a museum that is old in a very, very young city. So 60 years may not be a lot in older cities, but for us, especially with the speed of change of the city like Miami, it's like Sylvie Fleury's neon on our facade. It's eternity now. And that's why it was so brilliant and why, she really created a work that really reflects what we do. It is an eternal present state, Miami. So 60 years is kind of a long time in a city with a short history. So we're founded because the Bass, the John and Joanna Bass gave the city of Miami Beach their collection, and the city decided to house it in a Pancoast building, Russell Pancoast building, which was a library. So we have the beginnings of a library, and I love when we work with artists that work with archives, and they love that history, because being a library, which is kind of a place of knowledge, the museum kind of is furthering that in its own way, which I love. And so 60 years. And it went from primarily being a city-run museum to now being a civic, 501c3 nonprofit with a board and all of that. So it's not only the structure, it's, the programming and the staffing and the professionalism and all of that that's happened. I always say that I stand on Diane Camber's shoulders. She was at the Bass as a director for 30 years. And she did all the work that was sort of the initial establishment work. And then I come along 15 years ago and I get to do a lot of the fun stuff because all of that other sort of institutional work was done. And I'm very lucky, and I was very lucky. So when we got to the museum, we, as in two board members, we had two board members when I got to the museum. We had this great opportunity. The city asked us to further separate from the city. There was a sort of, telephones, IT, there were certain things that were still there. We were asked to separate in a very amicable way because there's still, funders and really good funders at that. And we were tasked with creating this new structure, a governance structure, and professionalizing the staff and sort of updating a lot of things to make us competitive in fundraising and in administration and finance and all of those very, very important aspects of the museum. So that's kind of the, the administrative part of what I do. the part I like best of what I do is sort of imagining and dreaming up what can this organization be. And that I've found is a really, really difficult question and proposition, because every time we kind of decide, we as in the board and the staff and our entire wonderful team, we decide what we're going to be, the rules change on us. So we have to go back to the drawing board and redesign and rethink. And that's the part I like the best. It's sort of this institution building, especially in a city like Miami Beach, which is constantly changing. It's so diverse, so incredibly, blessedly diverse that we learn all the time. And it's sort of I find that the board and staff and me and everyone, it's an act of humility being, institution building, because you're constantly sort of being thrown off with reality.
I just imagine in a community like Miami Beach, a really important question for you is, who do you serve? Who are your constituents and what do they look like? Because not only is Miami Beach incredibly diverse in terms of Jewish communities that have migrated from the Northeast, and a whole diverse set of Latin American populations that have relocated to Miami Beach, but a great amount of the year, there's a huge tourist population that comes through. And when you sit down to consider who you're serving, who do you have in your head?
Well, primary audience, I would say, is visitors and residents of Miami Beach. Then it extends out, visitors and residents of Miami-Dade County. I've tried, and we've tried to define it further, sort of narrow it down, but it's not quite possible to narrow this down. So it is a large group of very diverse people who live in this community, mainly Miami Beach, but then the larger Miami-Dade County community. It includes tourists who are there for the beach, and you know what, it was a little cold in January or raining a little bit, and they decided to go to the museum. It also includes Art Basel people. So it's like 80,000 people who come for a week. That's also included in the group. That is a very wide swath of people to work with. But I think that you can invite artists to do exhibitions. And now we're going into the curatorial program where there are multiple entry points, where, perhaps there's some beauty or some humor or some sort of some way to relate to the local community, meaning I don't even know what I mean. Tourists and residents, maybe thematically or through whatever medium of interest, that then you can peel off the layers for people who want to go deeper into the exhibitions. And that's what we've noticed, that it is possible to do that. And rather than kind of working towards, let's make this just more simple or more user-friendly, we've decided not to do that.
I hear in your answer that you are curating work that can be appreciated by a wide array of audiences, that it's not just specializing in Latin American art or, one thing or another. It's programming contemporary art that maybe crosses generations and crosses cultures.
Absolutely. It's not only cultures, and it's an international program. It's not only cultures and nationalities, but different, I think, layers of intensity and conceptualism. And you can be an expert curator, you can be an art consultant or a museum director coming in during Art Basel. But if you're here in January and you're a tourist or somebody who's escaping the snow for the weekend, you're going to enjoy these exhibitions. So when we talk, I think, about diversity in terms of the exhibition program, yes, we have diversity of, the ethnic and nationality and racial and all of those things that people have, but also diversity conceptually and diversity of thought that is maybe has some sort of anchor in our city. For example, I'm going to bring up Haegyu Yang. We did a big exhibition, Korean artist Haegyu Yang, and you would figure Haegyu Yang in the middle of art of Miami. What does a Korean artist have any relationship to Miami? But when in our conversations, she talked about displacement, about being a Korean artist working in Berlin. And she started talking about weather and the typhoons that happen in Asia. We thought, wait a minute, we're an entire city of rather displaced people, immigrants, and we deal with hurricanes all the time. And it became unbelievable what happened in an exhibition like that. And there are many, many other examples of exhibitions that, artists that they transcend their cultures. And so we're bringing people together and talking.
Do you also consider how to reach and provide resources for, the younger audience that is, in the course of their education? And how do you serve the youth in the community?
Well, that's very hard to do. Right now, we have a few programs, and one of them is STEAM Plus program, and it was an initiative of the city of Miami Beach, and it was spearheaded by the mayor. We run it, and we take artists into the classrooms of all 6 Miami Beach schools, but we also sort of are the hub for New World Symphony, ballet, Miami New Drama. So we manage that program, and we're sending actors, ballerinas, musicians, everybody into the schools. And then as a reciprocal nature, they come twice a year to the museum for their big end of season party or art exhibition and performance and all of that. That's a very successful program. And we also we have STEAM program. We have a program called Bass Babies, which I love. It's 2 and 3-year-olds, and it sort of begins really, really young, and it takes you all the way through until our teen council group. So we managed to sort of like a lifelong learning in the arts, which is quite awesome. We have our first graduates, I would call it. They're already in the teen group and outgrowing the teen group with all of these programs. We do 10 weeks of summer art camp. So we have 70 children that are at the museum for 10 weeks in the summer, all day, not just 2 hours, all day from 9 to 5.
Wow.
And so that's a very big program. It's a strong program. We also have graduates. We're so happy about that. And then all of a sudden they're graduating from summer art camp, and they're in teen group. So it's quite amazing that, that we've created this sort of loyalty, but also the need to have art in your life.
Those graduates of that program are going to hold the Bass as a special place in their hearts. And so like when you start talking about the longevity of the institution, those are people that are going to be emotionally invested in what you do, right?
I hope so. And our goal is always to reach further and further into communities that maybe it's not obvious for them to come to a museum. So we try to keep our scholarship program for camp at 25% or so every year. And we've been able to do that, as well as provide busing, which is really important, transportation for people who are going to be challenged to get to the museum. And we have a program called Creativity in the Community, which, outside of summer does take our teachers into their communities and brings them to our family days. And we realize what do you need? You need a program, but you also need busing. It's a big conversation with different communities to just sort of consult. What is it that you need? And what do you want out of a museum? And the answer that we kept getting was family programming. They want family programming, like intergenerational learning was very interesting.
Some museums, like ICAs, aren't necessarily collecting institutions. They put on exhibition programming that, without the need to care for a collection. But it sounds like the Bass is a little bit of both, that there's a collection. It's not a huge collection. How do you work as an institution that has a collection, but you also want to have new and interesting exhibits that reflect the most contemporary work? Is it an interesting balancing act? And does the collection, I know there are probably a number of issues that go along with maintaining a collection, like just simply space, right? I mean, we always want more space.
Yes, it's complex, and the way we've managed to balance it out is we commission work. That is really the crux of our exhibition program, is our commissioning program. So a lot of the shows, we start talking to the artists very early on. What can we do with you? What can you use our staff as if it were an extension of your studio? What is your dream? And we start working that way. Sometimes exhibitions have turned out not being exhibitions, but being work that we own, because it ends up being, it's a better work of art if this is commissioned as a permanent work for outside or as a video that we happen to buy later on. So with that commissioning program as the center, it really grounds our collection in a way that we're not out there shopping around for paintings. We're not, it doesn't work that way. It kind of comes through a process. And we look to artists like Miami Mountain. Ugo Rondinon's Miami Mountain was commissioned by us. So it's a small collection, but if you count that as one, it's kind of mighty. So that's what we're looking towards. What work can we own that is very difficult to own, that we can contribute to because it needs programming? So where is it that is our niche and that we can do justice to these works of art? Now we're looking at digital art. We're looking at commissioning a video game now. So we're very excited about that. So how do you own that? How do you own that?
Right.
Is the big question. So between exhibitions and collection, it goes back and forth. Collecting is very tied to our commissioning.
So when you commission the work, are you giving the artist kind of free rein, or are you kind of giving them a particular lens or something to respond to? Are they invited to respond to your current collection? Are they invited to respond to the space, just Miami Beach, or do they have free rein to kind of work within their portfolio?
Never free rein. That is enormous. It's free rein within some sort of scaffolding. I think it starts as a conversation. What is the most spectacular work of art that you can possibly come up with? And then you start with that conversation. And I love that part of the conversation because it's very free, it's very loose. And then as the conversation moves on, you start saying, but where does that thing exist? Where does that thing, how do you pay for this thing? What is this thing made of? So you begin the conversations. I think it's better to begin very large, and then honing it into reality is probably how then it's decided if it's an exhibition, if it's a work of art in the collection, or what it becomes. And then it gets very concrete, extremely concrete. Like we have an exhibition coordinator manager, and she will work with the artist and we'll go out and okay, we're going to try this in plastic and wood and in metal. And we're going to experiment. And then those experiments are done at the museum. And so it really is an extension of the studios. And it could be one work of art, or it could be a whole environment where you're creating an exhibition that is not something we would buy because it's quite ephemeral. It could be ephemeral, or it could be participatory. So those are just a little more challenging to own.
What parameters do you give an artist? How do you come alongside the artist for a commission? Especially when it's not like you're walking into the studio and saying, "I want this one." You're engaging in a dialogue.
I mean, most of the time, the actual meeting happens because there is a work or a body of work that we're attracted to. Mm-hmm. And we go there and we say, that you did in whatever Kunsthal is really interesting to us.
Sure.
Tell me about, what are you thinking? Is that a series? Is that something? Is there a part of it that is still something that has to be made? Is there still a piece of it that is unresolved and you'd like to work on? Sometimes the answer is no, the work is done. That's that. And I don't want to do that again. But I have this other thing. Right. That is really great. And are you interested in this? So it really starts with curatorial conversations. It really does. It could be, so for example, there's an artist that is a sound artist that I just had a studio visit with, and he only does these commissioned works based on sound in harbor cities. So I thought, wait, we're a harbor city. And I sort of raised my hand. Hey, we're a harbor city. You want to talk to us? And then we had this lovely conversation. And that's and then it gets very nuts and bolts, very nuts and bolts. This is the budget. This is what we can do. This is how much space. No, you cannot take up the entire park because we don't have $1 million. I mean, it goes all the way there.
I had a great conversation on the podcast last year with Tavares Strawn. I know that, he's part of your collection. Can you talk about that process? Because I'm sure it was a delight. I mean, just one of the more interesting people I've talked to.
Oh, he's fantastic. And I would love to do more work with him in the future. And we've been talking about that. The work in our collection, we're in this together. I love the work. And so during COVID, I asked the gallery that wasn't a commissioned work. That was an existing work. I said, I really want to buy this work, but we're in the middle of COVID. We don't really have meetings. We don't have a collections committee meeting, but can you send it to me and I'll install it and I'll figure out a way. And the gallery sent the work, we borrowed it, installed it, and the collections committee fell in love with it because it is that moment. And so the context of that moment when we were in the middle of the elections, when we were in the middle of COVID, to me is so memorialized by that work. It's just amazing. And now we just acquired by gift, the Faenas, Grace and Alan Faena gave us another neon, which is We Belong Here, which is amazing. And, speaks to all these diversity conversations that we're having, which are so important, but sort of the affirmative, aspirational. It's more than aspirational. I think it's affirmative and positive. We belong here, period. End of sentence. And I love that.
When you were talking about the history of the institution, you were talking about moving from part of the civic structure of Miami Beach to a 501c3. And I'm just really curious, that's a totally different funding mechanism. Did your life become more or less stressful moving from one to the other? You have to have a lot of conversations with a lot of different people now in a way that maybe you didn't before, right?
I don't remember when it was part of the museum, because when I started, that was the mandate the first day I got there. So it was already part of the transition. I didn't really live a time where it was part of the city. I think like everything, advantages and disadvantages, I would say. I mean, you have to run the place and you have a board and you have staff. And it's always stressful. And I'm a worrier. So I worry all the time. So I don't, I can't answer the question because I don't remember it before.
What do you worry most about? Is that a fair question, or would you rather not?
What do I worry most about? I worry about keeping programming fresh. I worry about staff not having affordable housing. I worry about always connecting with exhibitions and programs, like getting it right and not just missing the mark. And just keeping that up year after year after year is a little bit daunting. So there's a lot of thinking and talking about how is it that we can best serve these audiences and really connect in a meaningful way and do it correctly and respectfully. I worry about that because it keeps changing.
Right.
So I feel like museums have a really hard task ahead of us and behind us and around us and everything, because connecting is very hard.
I had a panel discussion with a number of museum directors recently where we talked about emerging technologies and how do you utilize artificial intelligence? How can you continue to engage visitors and constituents in ways that, maybe we hadn't even thought of 5 or 10 years ago? And part of that conversation revolves around, how do you even define a museum? And is a museum a building or is it an institution? And how does that affect the decisions you make about reach? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. We just had a really great meeting with Andras Santo the other day. He came and gave a lecture precisely about this. Is it a building or what is it? And I think it comes because for us, and we invited Andras because I don't know if you know, but there was a geo bond issued last year in November, and the taxpayers agreed to tax themselves to fund building in the cultural organization. So we got $20 million for a new building. Wow. And that to me is such an enormous responsibility because I feel like this is something that it's a gift that the taxpayers gave us and gave themselves, and we have to get that right. And so all of these definitions, what does it mean to be part of a community, a museum? And what do people want out of a museum? And how can we serve that need? And the answer just keeps going to social spaces, connecting, places where you can have exchanges. And so what does that mean? Does it mean you don't do galleries anymore? No, not necessarily. It means that maybe you can sit watching a video or working and participating with a work of technology and have a cappuccino in your hand. Like maybe it's a different way of seeing art, not in every single space, but in some spaces where you're kind of in between spaces, art and people at the same time, and breaking a little bit with that experience of walking into a gallery where the guard says, no, you cannot touch and you cannot have your cappuccino in your hand. And you just have to behave in a certain very prescribed way. So we're sort of experimenting and investigating how that can happen. So right now, in December, we've decided to open up a space, a show. We don't know what it is. It's called Social Assembly. And it's furniture and art and a bar and other things. And we're going to stress test the concept. So as we design the new space, we're going to have these annual social assembly situations. And we're going to see if people like it. We're going to see how people behave. Do you watch a video? Are you not interested in art? Are you interested only in art and don't want to talk to other people? So I think it's experimenting.
That's a social experiment on the museum grounds. Or do you ever think about pop-ups somewhere else on the Strand?
We do, but I don't think we have the capacity for that. I mean, we are a medium-sized organization, and right now we don't have the capacity. I think what we do think about is our outdoor art, which we have done quite a bit of. I think that's probably stretching our capacity right now. We can get there, but not beyond it.
What do you see on the horizon in the future? You mentioned digital art, the whole notion of what would gaming look like? How can you even get your arms around that? Where do you see the organization going? What changes are in store? Because since 1964, the institution has gone from an Art Deco library to something drastically different. Where do you think you're headed?
Well, there are two things. First of all, it's we have this wonderful Knight grant that we got this year, and actually it comes into effect next year, and it's for digital art, so art and technology commissions. So we're very excited about that. We did have Alex Israel in Snapchat, so we worked with a version of things, but we're really going to push those limits a little bit and see what we learn and see what audiences come with that. I was in Korea very recently, and there was a video game show, and it was filled with high schoolers. I loved it. I love that. So we're going to see where that goes, and I'm really excited about that potential. And we're building a new building. So will those two things merge? Maybe. But we have a lot of consulting with our stakeholders and high schoolers, for example. A lot of consulting to do. What would make you come here after school is a question.
So what programming is on the calendar for the near future? If folks were going to swing by the Bass this winter, what might they run into?
So we have Social Assembly, and it's works in our collection and design works by Emmett Moore. We have Namjoon Pike. We have this new series called The Miami Years. And very few people know that Namjoon Pike lived in Miami Beach.
Wow.
And so we're sort of, showing, including of work that we purchased. We purchased a TV cello. And Namjoon Pike, not only does it throw a light on like Miami years, and we have a series with that, but it also kind of starts up the arc of the art and technology. We thought, let's start here. It's a good place to start. And then we can go crazy after that. We have selections from the collection with some new works that we're excited about. Hernan Bass,
yes,
which is probably the largest exhibition he's had.
I had Hernan on the podcast just a couple of months ago. A wonderful guy.
Oh, he's a great guy.
And I believe he's based there in Miami.
He is. We thought it was really important to highlight his work. It's the biggest exhibition he's had in Miami. And we thought for the 60th anniversary, it was important to have a big sort of significant show of a Miami artist. He's producing the largest painting he's ever painted in his life. I can't wait to see that. And I said, okay, let's do a show, but what are you going to do that's different? What can you do with this museum that you couldn't do anywhere else? And we came up with that, the largest painting he's ever produced. And
how big?
It's 21 feet.
Oh my gosh.
So 21 feet by 10. So it's quite large. And then we have this artist called Ang Duki Jordan. She's a Korean artist based in Berlin. And that's going to be this video technology extravaganza.
If folks wanted to keep track of everything going on at your organization, where's the best place for them to follow you? Is it at thebass.org or on Instagram, or where's
both thebass.org and Instagram. But if you want to sign up for newsletters, just on our website, you sign up, and that way you don't have to come to us. We'll go to you.
Well, sooner or later, folks are going to come to you, right? Because it's Miami Beach, right?
They sure will. They sure will. And you know what? It doesn't matter how many years pass. We're always so excited about Art Basel Week or our, Art Week. And so excited to see our friends and our, colleagues come. And it's very special. And we're very lucky to have Art Week.
Well, Silvia, I really appreciate your time today. I appreciate you being willing to talk to us about your organization and the challenges and the opportunities and just the unique institution that is the Bass. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much, Craig. And thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. That's all the time we have for this week. You've been listening to ArtSense. You can find the show on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. If you've enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe. And while you're there, please rate the show and leave a quick review. Your feedback is the key to other folks finding us. And if you'd like to see images related to the conversation, read the transcript, and find other bonus features, you can go to cambia.art and click on the podcast tab. If you'd like to reach out to me, you can email me at craig@cambia.art. Thanks for listening.